I don't think about trends as much as I think about shifts. What are the really big shifts, and what are the forces behind those shifts? And are those forces working for us, against us, right? Do we understand what the expectation is? And at some point, I really shifted just to this perspective. I don't have a map that can guide me anymore. I have a compass. And my compass is literally this. What does the future need and expect? What am I in a unique position to create and contribute to that?
Hi, this is JP Newman of Investing on Purpose, and today we're interviewing Nancy Giordano, and we're going to discuss the topic, what does the future need and expect from you in order for you to be successful and for the world to be successful? Nancy is a dear friend of mine, one of the top thought leaders in the world around this subject about where we're going and how this might impact you and your company. Stay tuned for a great episode. Nancy, it took a while to get you here. I'm so thrilled that you are here with us today. You travel quite a bit in the world, speaking, engaging with top companies, top thought leaders, and we got you here. So before we get into it, I can't wait to jump into like our session about the future and where business is going and humanity is going. But before I go there, tell the audience a little more about you. What do you do and how do you do it, Nancy?
It's interesting when you're on a plane, right? Which I am on
a lot
many
of planes,
of them.
yeah.
And people, when I do talk to people next to me, which I don't always do, but when I do, and they ask me what I do, it's always an interesting conversation. So historically, I always said I was a strategic futurist. I was really trying to help organizations and leaders better prepare for the future and understand how they can add more value to it, and how the various forces are shaping and creating this need and expectation that the future has. But I just gave myself a promotion recently to Exponential Strategist because the future's already here. We need to stop talking about the future like it's this far away thing that we can at some point like navigate our way to. It's here right now, and we have this exponential horsepower in all these different ways and exponential need in all these very important and significant ways. And so I am a strategist that helps people link and understand how to take advantage of this and in a way that we all benefit from. Not just
one thing also I think that's really unique about the way you do it is you can speak in real business vernacular. So this isn't like some airy fairy or theoretical thing. You just go right down and really how the bottom line, how business actually is structured and works.
Yeah, business
will affect the line.
And the way that we incentivize that, because I am a big pro business person. I'm actually a very centrist person. Sometimes people wonder when I'm giving a talk, does it sound so like wild over here and highly progressive? But I'm actually very, very centrist. I'm a very pragmatic thinker. I'm not super airy-fairy around this stuff.
And I think not at all.
And I think business is actually one of the biggest drivers for our overall human flourishing.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to come from government. I think independent people, we can only do so much. I think that when we are able to unite under some sort of collaborative system, some sort of enterprise system, and often it is a business system, but it could also be something else in which we're gathering together to go create. But when we do that, we are enormously powerful and enormously impactful. And not even powerful, but impactful. Like we make a difference. And so I love being able to work with business leaders as opposed to any other entity, because I think that is where the power can really be unlocked.
Yeah. Ryan and I often in our episodes talk about how capitalism is the biggest force for good for humanity, like can do a lot more than government, which is why I love capitalism, and which is why I love this idea of investing on purpose.
Well, and that's why I'm now working on a project with two filmmakers on the future of capitalism.
Oh.
And the title is Humanity versus Capitalism. Because right now one could argue that capitalism has gotten distorted to be only a force for good for a small number of people and not the force for good for all of us that we would like for it to be. So I am pro capitalism, but as a friend of mine says, we should try it.
Right.
Because right now it actually isn't really set up that way.
Right. You and I both share an optimistic viewpoint, but your optimism is really grounded in knowledge and fact, and really looking at, and I think you do this better than almost anyone that I know, you can look around the corner of trends. So you're taking your knowledge of trends, where things are going in the workplace, trends that will create more, success, industries that will die, industries that will thrive. And then you're really thinking it through, like how are leaders and businesses going to have to act and be in order to succeed now and in the future. And I think you do that just better than anybody that I know.
Yeah, someone asked me recently about how I do what it is that I do, like what data sets I collect and how I crunch the numbers and all that stuff. And it's not any of that, right? It is looking at all all these things that are happening around us and being able to, is the fancy term, sense making,
Yeah.
they understand how they're connected to one another and lift it to a more systemic level. Because most people look at it very, very narrowly. And then when you look at it, this industry, they forget the rest, or this moment in time and forget the rest, or this demographic and forget the rest. And if you look at those things in a more holistic way, you're able to see the connections.
So here's my question. We're going to get into how I met you at TEDx in Austin many years ago and how that impacted my life. But before we jump there, how do you do that? That's actually a pretty hard skill to do. Is that just a natural thing where you just kind of correlate things together that maybe aren't obviously, most things that you tell me are not obviously correlated.
For me, I think that's very innate, right? For me, it's like, why isn't everybody seeing this kind of thing? And I think that the shift that I made from being a strategist in an advertising agency to being a quote unquote futurist was the fact that I could, like, people would give these downloads on like what's happening with demographic trends or what's happening with technology trends or eating trends or whatever they were. And no one was linking those things together. And I'm like, well, if you understand that demographically things are shifting this way, then you would understand that why people are making a decision this way. And then just like, it was just a big puzzle that for me, if you just put the pieces together. And so for me, I have a natural inclination to do that because I want to see it bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, even when I read documents, I try and make the type as small as I can and make the document as like, so I can, this page plus this page plus this page plus this page, so I can see the connections between those things. The hardest part about writing a book was that it had to be a linear book, and I think in circular and spirals and these mapped ways. And so that's a really tricky thing to figure out how to like tell a story kind of from beginning to end. But yeah, so for me, it is a more intuitive skill. I mean, I have things I'm terrible at. Like I'm super bad at super process tasks. Someone accused me recently of having poor executive functioning because I didn't like my password manager is a disaster. Right. So I do think partly it's understanding how your brain works, and I'm naturally gifted in that area, and it takes.
So how did you know, like where did this show up for you, whether as a kid, like before you became the Nancy of today, the speaker, the influencer? Have you always like, did it start with puzzles? Did it start with just like where did you notice that you were just really good at correlation?
I don't know that it was in school. I think I was just a really, really good student, just trying to kind of get through. And I think that partly I came up through a chaotic background. And I came up through a not super safe household. So I think you become very attuned to the situation around you and the signals. They could suddenly change this from being safe to unsafe. So I'm sure I was bred a little bit in that direction. And the reason I am actually a futurist, and now I'm going to call it actually an exponential strategist. I gave myself a promotion recently.
I like it.
Is because I just don't want to be blindsided. I don't like the fear. I don't like knowing what's about to happen.
So a lot of that's really, I totally get the connection now.
It's a safety thing.
It's a safety thing. It's also usually someone they call a truth seeker. You want to know what's around the corner for your own safety, and you also want to know the truth. I already know from our conversation about your pin that like justice is a primary value for you.
Well, and then if you go to the Enneagram and understand where you are on the Enneagram, right? I'm a challenger or a protector or a provoker. Like I'm not afraid to push a system that I think isn't working well. So I think other people work within a system probably better than I do. I'm better at being able to look outside the system and point to the parts that need to be adjusted one way or another. And I have confidence in doing that. I don't feel like I'm somehow not a belonger if I do that. So I think that all those things kind of combine to make it so. But I've worked my way into it. I mean, I've had jobs where I needed to do some of those other things, and I didn't like that work, and I did love this work. I'm a really good strategist. And I was rewarded very early on for being able to see things, being able to have insight around things, being able to understand where things needed to go, and for taking some creative risks. I worked in ad agencies that allowed me to push the boundaries on some of that.
That's great.
So,
well, when I met you, you had organized one of the first TEDx's in Austin. I think John Schubert introduced us in the world. And I was just starting Thrive FP. In fact, excuse me, it wasn't called Thrive FP. It had a different name. I was starting my real estate company, and I was just getting to a level of success where I was beyond survival mode. Before it was just survival mode, and now it was like just a little thriving, a little above survival mode. And I went to your conference, and it really was the first time I was really exposed to the principles of conscious capitalism. This idea that I could actually do good and do well for the world, that real estate finance could have a purpose, which, by the way, that is not obvious, which is why one of the reasons for this show was to show if you can do it with the real estate finance, you can find conscious capitalism anywhere, because I'm not exactly the most progressive or innovative industry on the planet. And that's kind of made it fun. You have to be super creative to kind of figure out how to do that.
It's such a fundamental industry, right? So we can unlock that. Imagine. I mean, again, you've been able to see the power of that.
Oh, it's been incredible. And I think what I left from your conference, the TEDx, was this wonderment. As it was the first time of saying, well, what else could this be besides providing for my family? What else could this be besides me impressing my friends that I've now had some level of success? Like, what else could this be? I don't think I had the luxury until that time in my career to really ask myself those questions. I was literally, or it felt like it at least. It felt like, what am I going to do? And that time was the pathway of starting to ask some other questions.
Do you remember the theme of that event?
Remind me.
Play big.
Oh, well, play big your company.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
I named my company that a few years later.
Oh.
But it came from the Marianne Williamson line in the essay that says, "You're playing small doesn't serve the world." And so all the speakers that were on stage that day were people who were playing big, right?
I
People
did
who
not
had done
remember that.
something. Yeah, Philip Berber was there, and a bunch of other really interesting people who had really taken this, whatever it was that they were working with, and expanded it to have much greater impact and much more holistic.
That is very
thinking.
ironic, because that's the moment I started playing big. So you burst. You're partly responsible for the birth of Playing Big for me. And I, obviously grateful, as you remember, I changed the name of my company from Principles Capital Funding, which couldn't have been more boring. It was kind of an inherited legacy name, to like what could better represent. And Thrive FP, if you ask my partner Adrian, was a really big thing, because Thrive, you could say, is really simple and unsafe, but saying FP, declaring in your title that you're a for-purpose, for-profit company, was a big deal. It made him very insecure, by the way. He didn't like it at first. He's like, I don't know that I want to tell people that we're a for-purpose company, like in the very title of your name. It was really bold. It's like, we were talking about how would investors react to that? Do we sound too airy-fairy? I mean, I know this sounds so obvious now, but it really wasn't back then. And what I found, I want to get back to your side, is that once you start declaring things like your name, it starts to happen one step at a time. This magical thing. So.
Indeed.
That's been my experience, but I'd love to hear. So tell me more. Did the ad agency, was that your stepping stone? Like, how did you start declaring more and more, where now you're like the top thought leader on this idea of like sustainable businesses, conscious capitalism, stakeholder, like you really are on the forefront of this. How did you go from that
I'm in a collection of people who are doing it, but we are a small group still.
You're a small group. You really are a small group, by the way.
But the more that you, to your point, you make it visible, the more that, it's like a beacon, the more the other people come and find you. And because there are a lot of people out there who think this way and haven't given themselves either that name in the title or the name of their company, or really like identified strongly with it, but they have an innate feeling and they're pulled toward it, right? People who come to the podcast who are feeling that sense, people come to my talks or read the book, or it's amazing. And last week, actually, I've gotten 2 people who just were searching for something on the internet, and my name became the thing that they wanted to be. Now it's turned into I'm a producer or co-producer on a documentary. There's 2 filmmakers who just wanted to interview me, and suddenly now I'm on their team. And a big event that I'm going to be doing in St. Louis, who are looking for this kind of thing. So people are looking for it. It's the good news. And I think people ask me about my career journey. I basically grew into it. I graduated college at a time when in Atlanta, when it was doctor, lawyer, banker, engineer, mother, teacher. Like those were kind of your options. And I'm like, I don't like any of those options. Those don't sound right to me. And I sort of did try on each one of those things. And I'm like, no. And so someone introduced me to the creative industries, to advertising. And I'm like, oh, there are my people. Because they think divergently, right? They think holistically. They are innovative in the way that they think. They're not process. Like I was just bad at process and repeating the same steps and just making them more and more efficient. And so I got to be surrounded by some of the best creative thinkers in the world. I worked for 3 or 4 amazing ad agencies, but I always wanted to get closer to the point of impact. They kept changing my budget, or they would change my campaign, or I was like focusing on why are we making these decisions? And so I just wanted to keep getting into why. So I am irrepressibly curious and frustrated sometimes that things don't make sense to me, and I work hard to try to make more sense. And so the way to make sense sometimes just to look at it bigger. Right? Once you can see the bigger system, then you can make peace, or you can know where to put some pressure to change things. And so I kind of just grew into it. And so then at some point, advertising changed because the internet was coming in, and people didn't really understand how the internet was going to change business so much. And then in 2007, 2008, we remember the recession. We forget that that's when the iPhone came out, and social media really was, growing quickly. And that had a fundamental shift and change in the way that we see each other, coordinate with each other, talk to each other, sell to each other. And businesses had a very slow time catching up to that. So at some point I left the advertising world, tried to work with companies and brands, and some of them got it and many of them didn't get it. And I would get really frustrated because I built a whole map about how branding was going to change with these innovations, and it's borne out completely. Like we're just, you see the steps, right? It's sort of being laid out for you,
right?
That these things are going to continue to advance. And you talk about me being able to look around the corner. Like I don't think about trends as much as I think about shifts. What are the really big shifts, and what are the forces behind those shifts? And are those forces working for us, against us, right? Do we understand what the expectation is? And at some point, I really shifted just to this perspective. I don't have a map that can guide me anymore. I have a compass. And a compass allows you to, chart new terrain with a sense of confidence and know how you can take the next step, because you can be able to sense and respond to new information. And my compass is literally this: what does the future need and expect? What am I in a unique position to create and contribute to that? As an individual, as a team, as an organization, as an industry, as a nation, as a humanity. You can scope that as broadly as you want.
Wow.
But if you really look at those two things and are paying attention to what the future needs and expects, right? It needs us to be more sustainable. It needs us to be more collaborative.
Let's just take a minute with that. I think it's really powerful. Just to ask yourself that question. I've never even thought, like, what does the future
need and expect?
I think that's a really, I think even as an entrepreneur, we're so busy doing business plans, that's a really primal question.
But interestingly, entrepreneurs answer that, innately, the same way I do sense making. Right. Entrepreneurs answer that question all day long.
By having relevant products.
Right. By thinking
about services.
Yeah, they think there's a place that they can plug into what the future needs and expects, because you're building a business that's going to grow. It doesn't exist yet. And so you're trying to figure out it needs whatever it is, a product or service that it needs. And then the next question again is then, what am I in a unique position to create and contribute to that? But contribute is an important word. It's not just create, right? How do I not just create the widget, but contribute something with that widget? Mm-hmm. And so if you look at those two things and you really are reflecting on those all the time, then it becomes like a roadmap.
You talk about, I know in your book, Leadering, you talk about contribution a lot. It's really important for an entrepreneur to contribute as a stakeholder, not just, you talk about extractive versus accretive. And this idea, can you tell me more? Why is that so important?
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who I worked a lot of this stuff through with verbally, didn't love the word contribution because he felt like it felt too philanthropic. And it's not how I mean it. It's not like you're like depositing something over here. It's literally that you are giving of yourself or your resources or your business or your intention in some way that creates value for someone else, right? You are contributing versus just taking. And if you're just thinking about it from that lens of historically, or certainly more recently, capitalism has gotten so distorted that it's so extractive, whether I'm taking from the land, whether I'm taking from people, whether I'm taking from attention, whatever it is, that I feel like I just want to hold it. And I want to capture as much of the value from that for a small group of stakeholders, which are usually just the investors.
Your investors are shareholders.
Right. I put investors sort of in that whole thing. Anybody who's a shareholder or capital holder for this company. And we don't think about all the other people who've contributed to that, whether it's the community, whether it's the employees, whether it's the partners, again, the environment. And I would even say the future. If we're extracting so much from nature or from the environment or from society, and we aren't thinking about how that actually depletes the future, right? Like you think about this amazing piece of land that you're on and how verdant it is and how these things all nurture one another. But if you just take, and it doesn't actually ever feed it back, it eventually will go away. Right. So we have a responsibility, I believe, to think about all these pieces.
Can I ask you about that? And I'm not challenge you, but, human beings were not marvelous at long-term thinkers, which is, this idea of 7 generations or one of the problems, whether you talk about the climate crisis or business, is that human beings are really good at short-term thinking, not great long-term thinkers.
Do you think that indigenous people weren't long-term thinkers?
I don't know. I was not an indigenous person. I just got back from Egypt. Right. And I know what they were thinking 5,000 years ago, and they were thinking a lot about, they actually seem, when you actually understand the hieroglyphics, you actually think they were looking at multiple generations, both here on Earth and in the afterlife. They were obsessed actually with that. So I don't know. I love what you're saying, but I think one of the, I wonder if it's a fundamental nature of mankind is because we can't see more than 6 months out. How do we make sure that we're not being extractive? One
of the extraordinary people that I get to meet in my life, right? I call them pinkers, people you need to know. A person that I think everyone should know her work, at least, is Rihanna Eisler. And she is now in her early 90s, but she has been in this work for decades and really thinking about it. And she wrote a book that was really seminal in the 80s called The Chalice and the Blade. And she will talk about that there were prehistoric societies in which they shared a chalice, men and women, and it was just much more collaborative. And it was a much more harmonious way of being able to coordinate. And it wasn't they were just hunter and gatherers. They had really sophisticated cities, and they did trade, and they did a lot of things. They have beautiful art. And then at some point it shifted to the blade. And then whether it's because we became more nomadic and you just sort of take over somebody's land, but whatever, the incentive structure changed and the need to go and take and plunder from others. And we have now been patterning that for the next 6,500 years. She'll say we took a 6,500 year detour. But the reality, as humans, you could argue that we're actually much more aligned for partnership and collaboration than we are for extraction and competition and domination. Like not so much competition, but domination. For her, the contrast is systems of domination versus systems of partnership. And so I've become very influenced by her work because I believe that too. Like I don't think that we were here all to dominate.
Are we innately wired to actually be thinking about these things, and somehow we've just lost our way? Or how are we innately wired as humans? Or
again, we have to also look at nature. So
Right.
then I also look at the biomimicry world and understand what's going on, not just biomimicry, but the biosphere, like what's
Sure.
happening in the world around us. And we are wired for collaboration. If you think about everything that's happening in those trees outside and how they're working with each other to sustain the system.
Right.
Right. And that doesn't mean that nothing dies in the forest. Of course, things die. Right. But then but even when they die, what they become, they decay, feeds something else that now is trying to grow. And they share resources with one another. And what is something that I don't need anymore is waste becomes nourishment for something else. And it's all circular and cyclical. Like that's the part that's so
when
cool.
You're speaking at a company, when you're trying to get this message across about, sustainable businesses and thinking this way, what's your best argument, your best case for people? I always say, like, sometimes people get it from their heart and sometimes people get it from their head. Not everyone gets it from their heart.
Right.
Like what's a good business case?
What's
a good business case for sustainability, I guess, or for sustainable business?
I don't always just use the case for sustainability, right? For me, it's just
right.
an overall way of thinking in which we're contributing versus extracting.
Okay.
And what does that look like?
Yeah.
I go back to lots of different data, right? BCG came out with a study in January 2020 that was called Thriving in the 2020s, which I always laughed that they did it like right before the world was like shaking like a snow globe. Like, really, is this how we're going to thrive? But they pointed to two things. One, that transformation was inevitable. They had, I think, predicted that I forgot now the stat, 1 out of 3 or 4 companies public companies would cease to exist in its current form over the next 5 years. And that rate had been much faster than it's been in the last 40 or 50 years.
The death of established companies is happening in a quicker
because
rate.
Digital transformation is going to come in and change us no matter what. So there's that first disruptive thing was already going to happen. That word disruptive, was around in the late, 90s, early 2000s. It was a big deal to talk about with that creative destruction and all that kind of stuff. But either way, like a business was not going to show up in the same form. So you had to be able to build capacity to be able to shift and to change. And particularly public companies, always tricky because we don't ever want them to change. We want them to be consistently delivering the thing they've been doing for quarter after quarter. And yet they have to invest to be able to shift and to change. So that was number one. And then the second was that they saw a growing profitability gap between those at the front end and those at the back end. And that's even become more great now, right?
Talk more about that.
Because those who understand the forces that are shaping the future are able to harness them and have a more outsized impact than those who aren't. Now, you could argue partly that's just technological. I own a lot of data. I know how to create the algorithm, right? I'm able to run faster than others. But I will also say those who understand impact, who understand that you want to have the best talent work on your team. You want to have investors that are consistent come to your brand and to your company. You want to have communities that welcome you when you show up as opposed to push you out. Like these are all forces that work for you as opposed to against you.
Can you name a couple of companies that you think where they really understand this and they really have the technology, the people, the community, they really understand the ethos?
The one that that shocks people when I say it, but is Microsoft.
Oh.
Like as big as Microsoft is, like literally the biggest, if not the second biggest company in the world, $2 trillion company run by Satya Nadella. And he really embodies what I call leadering, this mindset of what it takes to build a 21st century business. So sure, he understands the technology, right? He understands the value of TikTok and ran with Walmart to try and invest in TikTok when we thought for a second that was a potential option. And within weeks was able to pull together a deal where they were going to invest, I think, $7.5 billion in TikTok. It went away, but he was able to pull that together fast, right? Or with OpenAI, recognized that there would be a potential opportunity there, was one of the first big corporate stakeholders into OpenAI, and then very quickly expanded that as well. So certainly makes bold investments from a business perspective, fought for the cloud when no one understood why the cloud would matter. That was a transformation for Microsoft to be where it is now. But you think he's just a smart business and tech guy. And the reality is he's a big human. And I love the way he does things. So the tiniest example is during COVID when he was doing a lot of all hands meetings. He would have this shelf behind him, like he would do it, not in a suit, not in a tie, like really trying to break down silos and barriers and hierarchy. But he would have this shelf behind him and he would hide little things in the shelf that were like Easter eggs for the people that were watching the podcast.
That's great.
This is the CEO of a $1 trillion organization who's thinking about that, or at least has somebody on his team is thinking about it, and he's thinking that's cool. Right?
That's great.
He had a hackathon very early on when he first came to Microsoft, not just for the tech people, but for the entire organization. They were not it was not a mandate. It was invited, but really wanted, requested that people would show up and give up a weekend to try and build something that was better. When you were in HR, you could be in accounting, you could be in recruiting, you could be in janitorial services, like anything where you thought there was something we could do that would be better. This is your chance to come do it. And what it did is unlocked all of that pent up energy. We're like, we should be doing it this way. We should be doing it that way. Right. Yeah. And he's like, cool, then come do it. Showed that innovation wasn't just for the tech department, which many organizations organizations still believe that innovation just sits in some little group over there. And it showed them that to build what you wanted to go build, you had to go make friends with somebody in another department, right?
Which, by the way, remember, I met your friend at your amazing South by
Mike.
Southwest dinner, Mike.
Yes.
Who leads, what's it called? Garage? Is that what's it
Yeah,
called?
the Garage. But he was actually very instrumental in building the hackathon, because the other thing they did is they built a website around it so that everyone had to give a 30-second pitch, which felt very scary at a company that was super competitive up until then, right, with Steve Ballmer. And for the, anyone who had been part of the hackathon could see it, but it wasn't made public. He kept it really safe for people to do that. So at least there was a way in which they felt protected. Like, he put them out on the edge, but he held them well. This is the whole thing, right? Is that we push people, but we make sure that they're supported. Right. He does an extraordinary job at that. The last example that there's so many examples, but the other one that I think is so amazing is at one point they realized that their contract workers weren't getting any of the benefits that if you were full-time, you would get. So sorry. That's rampant in the tech industry. I think half of Google is now temporary work people. And their general counsel insisted that those people also still get some benefits. So even if they're out contracting it to someone else, they're contractors. They will only do business with people who also ensure that those people get paid. I don't know if it's sick leave or vacation leave or some sort of thing, but at least gives them some more of a social safety net.
Yeah.
So these are just things that he didn't have to go do any of those things. Yeah. Right. But he did. I remember the ice bucket challenge with the CEO of Walmart. And you're like, why is the CEO of a $20 company wasting time doing an ice bucket challenge with Doug McMillon? Right. But it made them more human. It showed that they had a relationship. Those are the two that came together, I think, for when they were trying to do the TikTok thing. And it just shows you that you can lead in a really different way. And there's a headline in a magazine that was in New York recently that said that Satya leads with empathy, poetry, and listening to build a $2 trillion empire.
Wow.
Best case study I can give you.
So just listening to you, if someone in the audience, which a lot of people in the audience want to say, how can this help me become a better leader or create a better company? Mm-hmm. And so what I'm hearing you say is, I know even going beyond sustainability, you talk about creative community building, showing your humanity, showing a community of caring. All these things actually really matter, no matter what company you want to build.
I will say caring is not a philanthropic act. Again, it is at the center of 21st century business.
Tell me why.
Because it builds trust. And that's really what's going to matter. If you have all my data and you can do all these things and create all kinds of experiences for me, I want to really make sure that you're holding me well. Otherwise, I will not trust you and I won't go there. And as an employee, as an investor, as a community member, as a consumer of that product for sure. I want to think that you really got my best interest in mind.
Trust is really important.
Really, trust is critical of where it is that we're headed.
For both the consumer and for the employees, for all the stakeholders.
For all the stakeholders. That's what I'm saying. It's also even the community, right? You saw Amazon try and go into New York and they were like, no, we don't want your headquarters here because you're going to take good care of people. And they had that whole battle. They could have worked that out better.
They definitely could have worked that out better.
But the fact is that whole thing caused a whole lot of time and energy waste for people. It didn't need to be done.
Right.
And so I really just think that if you look more holistically again at how you can be a really caring business, leader, an investor in all the well-being of everyone, that you'll just thrive, because that's where the energy is going. If you look at youth right now, what are they looking for? They're looking for companies that they believe are caring for other people, are caring for the environment, are thinking about equity and justice, or making sure that women have fair pay in the organization. Like, all those stats are really high for Gen Z. And so do you not want those people in your company? Like, those are the people that you want, right? At some point, maybe right now you think you don't want them because they're trying to figure, and they're rejecting the systems. They don't know if they should vote. They don't know if they should go to work. They don't know if they should try and do any of this stuff because
it's a confusing time.
Well, they feel like all the systems aren't holding them and aren't investing in them. And so they're trying to figure out how to sort of hack their own future together. There's an interesting.
That's really interesting, to hack your own future. If you can't rely on your society, if you can't rely on your government, then you have to find a way to safely hack your own future. And that's where you think a company can really swoop in and do something that really attracts talent and does something different.
Well, basically. And also recognizes its role in society. I talk about these three lenses to the future. One is as the professional or the organization. The other is as a human. We really want to know that you are bringing your values to your work and that those things aren't separated. You remember the days where people were like, I act like this at home, or I care about this at home, but I do this at the office. Mm-hmm. And you met those people. I'm not what you did the day that you decided to unite those things and create Thrive FP was the day that you decided to link that and not keep these as bifurcated things and intelligences.
I want Sunday and Monday to feel the same.
Yeah, and you want your integrity to feel the same all the way through, right? So it's not even that you're as excited, but you just want to make sure that you're a whole person and that the curiosities and the care and all those things that you feel as a human, you're bringing into your work. And then you recognize that you're a member of society. And that system has always existed. People always want to put it as a polar thing, like, do I do well financially? Do I do well, consciously? And the fact is they put them on these two ends of a spectrum that I think are not on two ends of a spectrum. They're part of a nested system. The question is, can you see the whole system? And if you can open up to the whole system and see that you're a member of society, that's why playing bigger. Playing bigger is bringing your integrity and your values and your consciousness to your work. And it is recognizing that you're a member of society. And when you do that, game on, right? Then we weren't scared of AI. Then we weren't scared of bioengineering. Then we weren't scared of autonomous vehicles. And we aren't scared of all these things right now we're so scared of because we think that we're playing so small from such an extractive place. And we do not believe that we're going to be well held. So there's been interesting phenomena for young people, just to go back to that.
That's really probably, that's deep. I'm just taking a minute to digest what you just said.
Okay, take deep.
Because I think that there's so many people with so much fear out there. So, and you just really hit a point that I just want to run over. Like, people want to feel well held.
Yeah.
They want to feel like they can trust. They want to feel like there is a future. They want to feel optimistic. Yeah. Nobody wants to feel scared.
No.
Nobody wants to feel like the future is dire or there's no place for me.
And then you can't trust anything around you.
Right.
Right. Which is to some extent happening at this point. It's why we have an opioid crisis. It's why we have this horrible, gun crisis right now. It's why I want to run around with a pin that says love, because I want people to not be so afraid of each other and of the systems that are around us. So I talk about that we deserve to be well held by each other, right? And respectful conversation, and in organizations that treat us well, by the technologies that we advance, by the systems that we design, and even by the stories that we tell about what's possible. There's so much doom storytelling.
Well, the government's not holding us well right now. So it's almost like, as communities and as people and through companies and capitalism, we need to hold ourselves as well as possible, because this may sort out with all the governments in the world, but right now governments, I don't think, generally hold their people super well.
But you know what? So again, the part that's frustrating is that we're in the United States, where we have a lot more power in our vote than you might have in other parts of the world, right? We are not under some sort of stronghold system in which we can't push back against. If we don't think our leaders are holding us well, then we should be actually pushing them out of office. Right. And the fact that we're not using that power as effectively as we could is really startling to me.
It might come. Right? I mean, everything's come in waves.
I do, but I just think the business community gets it. Like, I have spent a lot of time around the world and in big organizations, right? I've been at some of the biggest banks. I've been some of the biggest insurance companies. I literally just talked to the private equity world. Some of the biggest manufacturers around the world. Like, there's not a company that invites me to come and spend time with them that isn't trying to go do this. And so the fact that government feels so out of sync with what actual rational, Americans feel, and what most business leaders feel is really, like, if I were them, I'd be worried.
So do you feel like companies are getting it more and more, this idea? You feel do you feel like that capitalism, American companies are waking up to, like, the way to the consumers and what they expect and what they need right now? It's not just what they want, it's what they need.
Well, but I think understanding that balance, right? And I think that again, the companies that play big to me do it even if the consumer isn't asking for it. So CVS took cigarettes off their shelves many years ago, not because there was, like, people picketing saying, why are you selling cigarettes? It's because they want to be a trusted healthcare company moving into the future, because they know the future is not just about selling Band-Aids on the shelf, right? It's about being able to have care centers and all kinds of other ways in which CVS wants to be a health and wellness partner to me. You can't do that if you're selling tobacco in the store. They took a $2 billion hit for that, and then it came back. And what they actually saw was that rates of smoking in the communities where they'd taken out cigarettes had actually gone down.
Wow.
Right? Or you think Dick's Sporting Goods took out guns in their inner city stores after all this happened? Because they were like, you know what? Hunting is one thing, but no one's hunting in the middle of, like, downtown, like, named big city here. Right? I'm trying not to, like, point out one city versus another, because we have it in every city.
We do.
But they made a conscious choice to go do that. The other thing that CVS did more recently is they saw the rising, or I should say, unfortunately, the deteriorating rate of mental health for young girls, certainly around beauty image and trying to figure out if they could live up to all this, and perpetuated in unrealistic imagery. And they're like, you know what? They come to our stores to buy the products to try and look like that. Why would we have unrealistic imagery in our stores that just feeds that? And so they made a mandate not to do any digital retouching of any of the photos that are in their stores. And they asked Maybelline and L'Oreal and all their product partners to join them. They didn't mandate it, but they asked them to join it. And if they don't, it's cool. They just put a big watermark then on the photo that says digitally altered. Didn't have to go do that.
Wow.
Right? But that's using your platform and recognizing that you have a responsibility beyond just selling mascara, but in making people feel good when they come to your store.
That's really amazing. So if you're out there and you're creating a business right now, this has been some great, I really get, like, what it would take. A lot of companies will die. I guess when you have creation, you also have destruction, which is creating a lot of angst right now in America. Industries are going to get disrupted, whether it's through AI or like you're going to see massive disruption. I hear what you're saying. Part of it will just be you just don't need that company or that product or service. And part of it's going to be companies that are not just adapting to the new ways. It's almost like they're out of step of what the consumer of today actually wants. Cares for or needs.
Yeah, and again, I always lifted outside the consumer, right? What does society need?
What does
right?
society
A collective. Now, we're not just consumers, right? There's this whole conversation about being a prosumer, right? You don't want to just like, again, be like, I'm just trying to get you to buy shit.
Right.
That we want to make sure that we're, giving you the things that you need, and we're anticipating what it is that you will need and how you will need it, and helping you find the thing that you want to go find. I mean, there are people out there who are really trying to completely reinvent the internet. These are my friends who are thinking about how do we restructure the internet so that we can't track and we can't surveil and we can't immediately sell you something.
We don't get that efficient at being basically getting people just to spend their money, which is really what a lot of, that's a lot of what the internet's based on. It's like, how do we massively effectively, basically, create sticky content, right?
Because the only business model for so many of the big leading companies on the internet is advertising. And if we take that thing away, what happens then? Right. And there are people who are working very earnestly to take that away. And what I think is interesting about OpenAI, if you spend any time on ChatGPT, is that you can go ask for like a vacation agenda for some cool city you're going to go to, giving it very specific specs about who you are. You're not tracked then. You're not sold an ad then, right? No one's coming after you trying to figure out, did you really want to book that thing that you looked at? For now. Because that model doesn't exist on that. But imagine how pure that is. Someone, my friends, again, who are restructuring the internet, did a work session recently at a decentralized web conference in Denver. And one of the questions they asked is, if you could imagine a web that worked for you, what would it look like? Like if you could, like how would you want a human-centric internet to look? Right. And we all had, the 41 of us had different ideas about what that could look like and how that could feel. But for me, it's hyper-personalization is working for me instead of against me.
Makes sense.
Right?
They're not using your instincts to take advantage of you.
They're using it to serve you instead of stalk you. And that's a big difference. Like, again, I think about surveillance technology, if I can just go for, again, a tangible example. There's this whole conversation right now about whether or not we should be using surveillance technology for talent or employees to decide whether or not they're working hard. Or however, let's not decide to put it on their machines. The question is, why would we do that? If we're doing it to say, are they working hard enough? Are they at their computer long enough? Are they, whatever the, external like metrics might be about proving that they're loyal and engaged and producing. That's one way of doing it. It's very punitive. It makes people feel very small. It really it's awful. Clock. It's like every bad like dystopian science fiction thing. But if you use that exact same technology and said, you know what, you haven't gotten up from your desk yet, JP. Have you, you haven't taken a lunch break yet. You haven't walked around the thing. Your blood pressure looks like it's too high. You look like, you said you wanted to work your last goal session or whatever, that you wanted to spend more time learning something here. You should take more time to go do that. Or you're working on a project. Did you know there's 5 other people also have some input that they could give you to that project? If it was an ally for you and your well-being and your growth and your productivity, imagine how differently we would think about that software. So I always go back. You
wouldn't be so scared of AI working against you. You'd be like pro-human.
It's not about the technology. It's about the intention with which we build it and the monetization that we put against it. What are we incentivizing? Are we incentivizing that we take good care of each other? Or are we incentivizing that we don't?
But you bring up a good point. Your point is that you can incentivize people to do the right thing and they can still make an outsized profit. You don't, because I think most people think of, you got to do these things because we got to sell as many cigarettes or we got to sell as many as, and your point is that when people really connect to what you need and they can trust you and you get that loyal customer, the value of that over time is worth so much more than trying to huck.
Totally. And you might make a faster buck now, but it's not going to be quote unquote sustainable, right, over the long term, because I think people are going to wake up and realize that doesn't feel okay. The difference is right now it's so complex, right? You've got banks that are so complex and you've got retail like advertising stuff online that feels so complex, but the jig is up. We're going to have more transparency around that. Yeah. We're going to have a lot more apps that track that, right? I'll be able to see, your environmental footprint, your social equity footprint. There's a credit card now out of Sweden that has a carbon budget attached to it, basically. And so rather than just figuring out and tracking my money, it tracks my carbon usage. So if I buy an expensive plane ticket on an airline that doesn't give a crap about the environment, which I unfortunately do many times, way too many right now, but then I want to go buy a pair of shoes somewhere, at some point my credit card will stop working, right? So we're going to have products and services like that. They're really in service of making these kinds of decisions. And who's that card attracted to? The people who want to feel as though they're taking good care of the planet. who, by the way, 42% of the population is under 25 in the world. They care a lot about taking good care of the planet.
Yeah.
Right. So you want to talk about where are the growth drivers in the future? What is, again, the opportunity that the future is saying it needs and wants is to provide services and to provide products that help people align with the values that they want to see happen in the world. Right. Those are the things that will allow us to. Yeah.
Do you have some personal favorites, 2 or 3 companies that you're rooting for that you think kind of are aligned with those values?
Gosh, that's a really good question because mine are so far out that they don't really have like a traditional business model.
ChatGPT, I think AI, at least I think you say
AI as a technology, I'm pro AI.
Yeah.
But I'm pro responsible use of AI. And
but your example now, like, even to this day, the fact that I just did it for Portugal.
Yeah.
That, it didn't try to sell me a plane ticket yet.
No. But I love, again, but hyper personalized, right? I could say I'm a couple in my 50s who love to go bike, love quirky restaurants and vegetarian, fine dining. And boom, I got from Mexico City the exact thing that I should be doing in Mexico City. And it was right on, which felt really like exciting. It saved me tremendous amount of time.
Anything else on your short list?
God, what do I do? I mean, there's lots of things I spend my time and money doing. I'm just trying to think of, I just go back to a value. Again, I am a Microsoft champion. Do they make every decision right? No. But do I really appreciate that they're trying? Yes. And I love the way that they're investing in people and the way that they talk to things. And so I just try and champion the organizations that I think are taking good care of all of us. I just had lunch with someone earlier today, and her frustration around the green economy stuff is that we're seeing it at a big corporate level. Like, again, I got a chance to even hang out with the chairperson of Tata Group, Chandra, who runs 125 companies in India, like one of the most powerful business people on the planet. He gets it, 100% gets it, is really trying to sort it out. We see Dell gets it, right? We see other companies get it. Where it hasn't trickled down yet is to the small businesses.
Interesting.
There's a big gap right now in small businesses who aren't thinking about any of these issues and making them a really key driver of their business success. And so what she's going to try and work with is the Small Business Administration to actually add it to the list of questions that businesses should be asking about.
Why do you think that's big business?
You know better than I do, because I don't spend as much time with small business leaders. I don't know if it's that they just haven't been patterned to think that way, and they're just trying to get to, like, I'm taught that this is the 3 things I need to do to make a successful business, and not these are the 5 things I need to do to have a successful business.
Actually, just kind of my story I told you earlier. It could also be that a lot of business owners, whether you own a restaurant or you own these car washes, you're not living necessarily in abundance. You're kind of living, a lot of them are living paycheck to paycheck or rent to rent.
Right.
And so maybe again, if you're in the mindset where you're not going bigger than just your immediate needs and you're in survival mode, it's very hard to kind of climb into that more aspirational or thinking ahead,
I think it's thinking ahead, because I don't know that it's aspirational, because I think in their daily lives they do care about those things, right? You ask moms on Snap and they still would like to have organic produce. They just can't afford to have organic produce.
That's exactly right.
But it's I don't think that people have made that visible for them as a business leader. You will actually do better if you do these things.
I think that's
right. And again, I'm talking to private equity firms who are investing in car washes and in home healthcare companies and in all those kinds of things, and recognizing that actually as a business leader, if you actually take a better care of your people, you take better care of the environment, it will actually, your business will do better. You'll be able to attract the talent that you want. This all works again cyclically.
Well, Nancy, if you can just convince the world of this, then I don't have to have a podcast anymore. It'll be the end of investing on purpose, because I'm going to keep talking about this with more leaders to prove the case.
Yes.
Top CEOs and thought leaders that actually
but
doing good and doing well is the way to go.
But inspiring the smaller business and especially the entrepreneur that's starting a company. If we can embed that from the minute they start the company, that this is how you build it from the ground up. You don't wait.
Heard this. Did you hear this?
You don't wait until you've reached a certain level.
Yeah, exactly.
It is built from the moment that you start the company, and that is how you grow big.
So, Nancy, if I was to say to you, what do you think the future of work is? How would you describe the future of work?
Well, I go and make, of course, I make things slightly more complicated. I make a distinction between the future of work and the work of the future.
Yeah.
Right. So when we talk about the future of work right now, often we're talking about how can we optimize the system that we currently have? So how we can work more efficiently? Do we do it remote or not remote? Do we do it with certain tools? Do we change kind of patterns of management? And so all those conversations are happening. And I think the biggest shift that will happen there will be a shorter work week. I think we're absolutely going to go to a shorter work week. Yeah. All the evidence is pointing in that direction.
Interesting. Which people are really resisting. Some people are resisting.
But everyone wants the productivity hack, and they think it's going to be AI. The productivity hack is less time in the office, like less time working, and you have the productivity hack. Microsoft, again, this is why I'm a big cheerleader, in 2019 did a test in Japan and found a 40% lift in productivity within 4 days a week. There's a big, huge study that's been done in now the UK. 91% of the companies that participated in that study across all different types of work, including manual versus more digital work, are going to continue with the 4-day work week, because half of them saw a lift in productivity and the other half didn't see a lift, but they saw a lift in everything else: engagement, well-being, retention, all the things.
So is that your prediction for the future of work?
For sure.
Is a 4-day work week?
It will be a 32-hour work week.
What else?
So that's around the future of work itself. I think around the work of the future, we will decouple paid work from energy expended to make the, to express what it is I think that the world needs to see from me. I have 5 jobs, only 2 of which are paid. And I think we use work to only describe the ones that are paid.
Interesting.
And not to describe all the other ones that we do.
Yeah.
Right? So we're not technically being paid to go do a podcast right now, right? I wasn't paid to be a mom. I wasn't paid to be a TEDx organizer.
Right.
But these are all things that added tremendous value to the planet, as well as economic value to the planet. And so I think that once we can figure out how to better distribute productivity, that's the big question we've got right now. A third of the workforce may be, unemployed, either because technology has replaced the job or they don't have the skills to move into the next job. We have to think about how to distribute productivity much more effectively. And so not rely on just he who holds the algorithm, and it is a he at this point, who holds the algorithm contains all the value, that value somehow also needs to be distributed. So whether that's universal basic income or thinking about a whole constellation of universal basic housing, food, transportation, education, childcare, all those things, because those costs are all going to come down with this productivity lift that we're going to have. Or we think about getting compensated for our data. And we have a data dividend, the way Andrew Yang used to talk about it.
Yeah.
Or we think about any other ways in which we can exchange value. So again, this new looking at the internet that my friends are doing with Holochain is a way in which we could think about that we could exchange value with one another, not through traditional business systems, and still be able to have a high quality of life. So we're looking at, for me, my work right now is focused on what I call the beyond economy, economic structures and business models that will be beyond the version that looks like the one that we are trying so desperately to patch up now.
I also think, I'm following kind of where you're going with this with workers, I think there's a reasonable chance that workers won't have one job.
Yeah.
They'll be independent contractors. So like Alex here, our producer, he started his own company. He left his last job.
Exactly.
He has his own producer, and he works for today's. This is his 3rd podcast he's recorded today. So
totally. But he saw what the future needed and expected. What he saw were businesses who were trying to do podcasts didn't have the capacity to figure out how to do this all on our own. Right.
Right.
So, you learn so much more and are able to do it so much more effectively and efficiently because you're doing 3 in a day and you have all the equipment, you know how to edit it, you get inspired by the conversations. We're on to the next thing that we're going to go do.
And it's also not a 9-to-5 job. He could take tomorrow off, and then so that idea of
completely,
you just get paid. And I imagine, I actually used to spoke on the boat with Ping Fu. I don't know if you know who Ping Fu is. Yeah. So Ping was in Egypt, which was amazing. But this idea that not only will you get paid maybe hourly for what you do, but literally as you get rated as being a trusted and really knowing an expert in what you do, your hourly rate might get voted by the community, or it might be supply and demand.
Oh, interesting.
So if Alex takes on 3 or 5 or 10 more podcasters, if you grab him after the show, his rate might go up with me on an algorithm. Because now all of a sudden he has the same time for less people. So literally,
which technically ours as talent has done, but we've done it over much slower periods of time, right? I'm worth more next year than I was this year.
We kind of do it naturally, but imagine if the computer literally,
time.
It's like a schedule. You've got to get to a Ping or to get to a Nancy or to get to these people, and you want real estate advice or advice on how to structure your business. There's so many slots. It's supply and demand.
I think that's fabulous. But that's what goes back to, there was a session at South by Southwest I didn't get to go to that predicted by, I don't know if it was 2030 or something, that 50% of us would be CEOs. And what they were really saying would be solopreneurs, right? Be in charge of our own destiny and plug and play into things. I think it'll be much more fluid than it is now.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. The 32-hour work week is only for the structure that still exists in that way. But I think the rest of us are all going to become individual contributors. The biggest barrier to that right now is health insurance. Right? Tying health insurance to full-time employment is the most ridiculous, acronym system, whatever the word is, legacy system that is holding back innovation around that. But if we could decouple that and have people still feel safely held by some sort of health system, then you'll see a very, very different way in which
that's a whole other podcast, but I agree it needs to change. Okay, Nancy, we're going to wrap up here. So here's my final question to you.
Yeah.
We're going to sit down for dinner in, let's say, 3 years from now.
Okay.
And it's going to probably be one of your fabulous dinners, or we'll organize a co-dinner together. With an optimistic bend that you and I naturally have, what's changed in 3 years? A prediction 3 years from now, 4 years from now? What are we seeing in society that was a step forward from where we're at today as we record this?
I think, again, this conversation around time and how we spend time and what that time looks like and how valuable that time is, we're going to have all these giant productivity advantages, whether it's generative AI that does it or whether it's a robot that does something or whatever it is.
And what you're saying is don't fear that, embrace it.
Yeah, but the only way to do that is to also push for social systems that make that possible. We've built no scaffolding for this next new era that we're heading into, right? There was social scaffolding that was built into the industrial era. Education systems, we ended up doing a social security system, we did environmental regulation, we made sure children didn't work in factories until recently when we thought it was okay for them to do it again. So we haven't built any of that kind of scaffolding for this next thing. So I don't think it's a little naive to just say, don't fear it. Right. But know that we need to push for the other things that hold us well. So what would be a way of distributing that productivity so that it isn't just the person who is sucking up all of our knowledge and putting it into an algorithm and not thinking about the autonomous truck driver or the truck driver when we have autonomous vehicles who's no longer getting paid or paying the hotel or paying the restaurant or paying the people along the way. So I do think we need to think through the system level. Don't just look at it. I think the biggest thing is don't just look at it at a little myopic level.
Right.
Really try and look at it from the systemic level. Think about who is advocating for that, both in terms of in terms of companies and in terms of legislators, use your power.
Makes sense. I'm noticing a trend that I'm hopeful will continue is this idea of first world versus second world versus third world. I think there's an opportunity to start to blend that more, where when your phone and your computer are the beginning to opportunity that you didn't have 10 or 20 years ago. And I'm seeing that with some friends that are now my family. I call my adopted family from Uganda. Yeah. I met them in a village, but already he wants to get his tourist degree, right? And college is too expensive. And so I'm like, go online and see if can you get your degree with an online course. And all of a sudden he came back to me this week and said, oh my God, this is $10,000 cheaper. For $1,000, I can get the same degree that's $20,000.
Yeah.
So this idea of a great equalizer, using technology to be a great equalizer, will continue the trend and maybe even accelerate the trend of wealth and getting rid of poverty and really giving a chance, to your point, for not just some people, but more people.
The other thing that I think we'll see in 3 years, right, is certainly much more appreciation of Africa and India as rising countries.
For
right?
sure.
The population is moving so dramatically. Like India just passed China. Africa will pass, all of it at some point. There's a stat, I think, that by 20, quote me on this one, 2030, we'll have to double check, 2030, 2040. I think it was like a majority of the world's population will be under 18 will be from South Africa or from the continent of Africa.
Yeah.
Like that. So I'm jumbling up my stats right now, but the idea is there's the big population boom is going to be in the global South. That's how I think about it in terms of nomenclature. And so what will they demand? What will they need? What will they think about as they rise and they look at how we have been handling resources and taking good care of things? I think there will be big geopolitical shifts that are coming our way.
Super cool. Nancy, thank you so much for coming here.
Thanks.
And doing this. It's just such a pleasure.
It is a pleasure. Thanks so much. I'm glad it gave us a chance to hang out, which we keep trying to do.
We'll do more of that.
Good.
Thank you.